Good morning, British Literature Scholars. Welcome to the ninth week of the fall 2017 semester. We've got a couple of bits of news for you. I've caught up on the grading for the most part. I've not graded the response papers from week 8 yet, but I've graded all the response papers weeks 2 through 7, and I've also graded all of the quizzes, including week 8. I have submitted your midterm grades to the registrar, so whatever day those come out, I'm not sure when they do come out. They were due this morning. So I've gotten those taken care of for you. Those grades, again, I've not graded the response papers for week 8. So those grades are accurate up through week 7. But that grade could be different depending on how well you did or how poorly you did on the response papers. And some of you didn't turn in a response paper for week 8, and there were 2 of them. So that's certainly an issue that you might need to take care of. All right, week 9. We've got 2 very important Victorian issues that we're going to look at. The readings are all fairly short. The first one is the woman question. So the Victorian era was so long, it lasted about 60-something years. And we're counting just a little bit before Queen Victoria took the throne, and then of course we're counting all the way up through about World War I. Queen Victoria died in 1901. So when I say up through World War I, which started around 1914, the Victorian era was slightly longer than the lifespan, or the reign, if you will, of Queen Victoria. So the woman question was very interesting because at the beginning of the Victorian era, or the early Victorian era, women were still pretty much the property of their dads and husbands. They didn't have a whole lot of rights. Basically, their only jobs that were open to them, if they were working women, were to be like shopkeepers or seamstresses, nannies for the rich people's children. A lot of them worked in the factories, and we talked about industrialism recently already, a couple weeks ago. A lot of these women ended up working in the factories. Most of the woman questions centered around the upper middle class and the upper class women, who were the bored, always flighty wives and mothers types. The first reading you're going to see is by John Ruskin, who's going to make the argument that a woman's place is in the home, that a woman, wherever she goes, the home goes with her. The woman is to be protected by all the dangers of the outside world by the man of the house, unless, of course, that woman invites those dangers in herself. Remember, at this time, women were not allowed to inherit property. At this time, women were not allowed to own businesses. Remember, at this time, women that were working for wages in factories, a lot of times factory owners would pay those wages to the husband, who would then spend it however he saw fit, without any input from the wife. So that's the early Victorian period. So we're going to see what Ruskin has to say about the woman's job as a homemaker there. Walter Besant is going to be right towards the end of the Victorian period. I think that piece you're going to read was published in 1897, and the role of women has changed. Women are demanding change, and they're getting those changes. Women are going to be allowed at this point to ride bicycles. They were smoking cigarettes. These were things that were unthought of at the beginning of the Victorian period. Also, about this time, women are starting to take jobs that used to be open only to men. And he gives a whole laundry list of those jobs. So you might want to pay attention to that. Women still were not really practicing law at the time that Besant wrote this, but he's going to make the statement that he thinks they will soon. And of course, we all know female lawyers now and female judges. All you got to do is turn on the TV and watch Judge Judy or something like that. So you know now that women are in just about every single profession. Women were not at this time still allowed to hold high offices in the Church of England, and I don't think they are yet. But they're allowed to hold positions, of course. But anyway, the whole Church of England thing is separated from, say, the corporate world, and so it's interesting to see the differences in attitudes towards women between Ruskin and Besant. And Besant says women are going to gain even more independence and more strength, and of course his predictions came true. The other thing we wanted to look at is British imperialism. This is extremely important because British imperialism would change the face of the earth. Border lines between countries would be redrawn based upon whether England held that plot of land or France held that plot of land or whatever. The United States would not get into the imperialism game until much later. And that's because the United States was trying to start its own country and was trying to work out its own problems internally. But now you know that we've got army bases all over the world. Now you know that America has claimed lands like American Samoa and Puerto Rico. And of course, you know that story of Puerto Rico after the hurricane blew through. So America would get into this game late. But at its peak, Great Britain, under the reign of Queen Victoria, claimed dominion over 1/4 of all the landmass in the entire world. And that landmass was protected by a very, very strong navy which guarded the waters around those territories. All 7 continents, including a little chunk of Antarctica. Every time zone. It is believed that at its peak of British imperialism, the sun was shining on some plot of land, no matter where it was on the Earth's orbit. The sun was shining on some plot of land that England held dominion over. It was during the reign of Queen Victoria that she was named the Empress of India. And basically, England was running India, and that would remain true up until after World War II. So, we're going to look at that relationship between India and Great Britain as we go through the readings. So, your quiz will look at the introductory reading. Of course, you can use the slideshow as help, and then, of course, it's going to look at 2 different authors: Thomas Babington Macaulay, who's going to make the argument, and he's the same guy that said that industrialism was good because of statistics. He's going to make the argument that English is a far superior language than any other language, is far superior to the languages that the people in India were speaking. Therefore, the children of India should be taught in English. But he's also going to make the argument that the children of India are not smart and that they can't understand English. So what's the solution? Well, you teach English to the brightest students, and then those students take over and teach the dumber ones, if you will. So, a very, 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 very elitist point of view by Thomas Babington Macaulay, and one that you hear people talk about America all the time, and people that come to America should speak English and all that stuff. This is nothing new. This argument's been going on since British imperialism, and Great Britain tried to dominate the world. Then you're going to see a counterpoint by Russell, and Russell was a journalist who went and saw the carnage after something called the Cawnpore Massacre. What the Cawnpore Massacre was all these British people had come into the part of England around Cawnpore and had built these elaborate homes and had walled off their property. And basically, the native Indians, by Indians, of course, we mean the people of India, the natives of that country were not allowed in these properties. These British would hold these expensive feasts and these expensive balls and these expensive parties, but the Indians were not allowed there. Or if they were called the N-word, and you'll see that in this reading. And so the leaders of India were actually thought of as being inferior to the British leaders who claimed India as their own country, and so they would repress the native Indians. Well, it got to a point where the Indians had decided that enough was enough, so they basically tricked all of the British, the white folks that lived in Cawnpore, together in a group, and then the Indians slaughtered every single one of them, men, women, and children. And the people of India were horrified and outraged and said, "We've got to fight back. We can't allow this to happen to our citizens." Now, never mind that these are citizens that are living in India under British citizenship, but as you can imagine a group of Americans being slaughtered by a group of Islamic militants in somewhere like Afghanistan. Of course, we would cry out in horror and we would want something done about it. Russell, though, is going to ask the question, well, do we really belong here? Can we really blame these Indians for this uprising when they're all living in huts and they all are starving to death while the British are actually living high on the hog? And so he asks the question at the very end, has India become better off because of British rule? And he doesn't answer the question, but he kind of leaves the suggestion that maybe it's not. So British imperialism is an extremely important topic, and one that we're going to look at closely this week. And we're going to look at both sides, the British elitists and the folks that might say that, maybe India is not as well off under British rule as it was on its own. So those are the two sides of that coin. So that's this week's readings. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'll try to answer them as quickly as possible. And I look forward to your responses about these two subjects.